and welcome him forward. So as you can now tell, the video is on.
Thank you, Ryan. It's so great to see everyone again. I hope that you've enjoyed your practice today. It was really good to come and sit with you in the period that just preceded our time together now. And I also hope that the teachings that I offered last night as an orientation to the precepts as a reflection of our basic theme for the retreat of finding our way home and walking the Bodhisattva path when the world is spinning has resonated in ways that are carrying us forward. It certainly seemed from the questions that people brought at the end, which were very rich and beautiful, and I hope we'll continue with that today. You know, one of the things about doing something like this is that the resources that I draw from, and all the many, many wonderful resources about the precepts and Buddhist and Zen teachings in general, are pretty easily available to you now. It's not difficult to access them through books and podcasts and recordings, and there's just so much available. So for me, simply to offer what you can get on your own if you wanted is not always the highest and best use of our time. I do want to offer a perspective and a weaving and a way of enlivening of the teachings so that they land well, and hopefully encourage you to look further to all those resources that are available. But in some ways, the most unique thing that we have available when we have a retreat is our time together, our connection. And so when we have a time for discussion, that's amazingly rich, and I appreciate Ryan and all the other organizers considering that maybe that time might also be available for reflection later on. Today, I'd like to speak about the relationship, kind of the confluence of two important pieces of Zen practice that are part of the precepts and a part of walking this path together and finding our way home. And those are the two aspects of our conduct and vow. I'm going to speak a bit more about the conduct side today, and a little more about vow tomorrow. But we're going to weave those together because they're essential foundational parts of our study of the precepts and our understanding of how the precepts are so powerful and essential in Zen practice. You likely know and have heard and read and maybe experienced yourself that we sit, as we just did, as a way to both realize and express our true nature, to sort of stop what we're doing in our lives, and to sit in an upright, dignified manner so that we can express our very nature as a Buddha, and in so doing realize it. It's a little backwards in Zen. We express it with some confidence that that is our true nature, and slowly we come to realize and embody what we've realized. Our pardon me, our original nature is not some inherent pristine essence. It's not some special thing that we're digging around for. Rather, it's something that is actively done. And this may not be immediately understandable or clear, or it may seem odd, but our original nature isn't some secret, good, unblemished place inside of you that you're trying to find. Our original nature is something that you enact. In fact, when asked to define what is meant by Buddha, the sixth ancestor in our Zen lineage in China, Huining, remarked that it is precisely Buddhist conduct or practice that is Buddha. So he was stating something really foundational in our practice, that our practice is not a means to enlightenment. Sorry, but it's not a means to enlightenment. It is the demonstration of our originally enlightened nature. And it's not a self-contained state achieved once and for all, as if enlightenment were out there somewhere and I'm going to reach it and finally I've arrived. Now I am enlightened. An individual, separate self could have something called enlightenment. That statement includes a whole lot of things which aren't anything about Buddhism. There's no individually existing I, and it's not something you can have. So practice isn't a means to enlightenment. It's the demonstration of our originally enlightened nature, not as a self-contained special state that you get once and for all. It's an ongoing, transformative flow and process of awakening, because it's alive. It's aliveness. It's your aliveness, which is none other than Buddha. The term nature, which we are using here, true nature, original nature, in English, kind of using it easily. That term comes from the way it's rendered in Chinese in these teachings is, and I'm not a Chinese scholar, so I don't know these things, what the kanji is, or the character, excuse me. It's Xing, Jing. That's nature, which emphasizes, that character emphasizes patterns of relationship, patterns, activity, and energy. Suggesting that our original nature then, it consists of actively orienting relationships in response to some, I would say, like meaningful resolution of suffering. Remember our chant we just did? Some meaningful resolution of suffering or trouble that's manifesting in the interdependence among everything around us. Everything is interdependent. They're mutually arising. And so we attend to these patterns of relationship. And our nature is an expression of this pattern of relationship. It's not, our true nature isn't some thing like an essence, as I said. Therefore, another way of saying it is conducting ourselves as bodhisattvas, because Huining said it is precisely Buddhist conduct or practice that is the Buddha. So conducting ourselves as bodhisattvas involves very humbly exhibiting a very strong, a complete and unreserved readiness to be of service in the realization of awakening for ourselves, for others, but in the service of awakening. Because, in the Chinese way of thinking, Buddhism from northern India arrived in China and met Taoism, among other things. And that combination of northern Indian Buddhism and Taoism became Chan, and then called Zen in Japan. And in the Chinese way of thinking, the pattern of all things The reality is the Tao, and it must be allowed to circulate freely, to be unhindered. So you can see that what the Chinese are saying in this, and our early Chan masters and our early Zen teachers are saying, is that the relief and release and unhindered nature of our essence, that these patterns of relationships in which we're all embedded, there's no way to step aside from them, is what freedom and liberation actually is about. And these may sound like esoteric kind of philosophical aspects, but they're really essential when you talk about the precepts, because the precepts are about conduct. In Indian Buddhism, wisdom, or prajna, which many of you are familiar with that word, meant wisdom and knowledge, kind of understanding about the cessation of what they call influxes, our mental and sensory world, which creates thoughts and feelings and reacts to apparent things, and we build a self that way. So prajna meant knowledge about that, really understanding that. And it meant realizing through practice a state of consciousness free from impure influences and defiling activity. Well, first it meant a state of consciousness. But states are created. They come and they go. They're conditioned. So our original nature can't be a conditioned phenomena. So a state of consciousness wouldn't be what we're shooting for. A state of consciousness in which you're more awake and free and less caught by habit is a great state of consciousness, and I want those. I want those for me, and I want those for everyone else. But awakening isn't about being pure. So the Chinese Buddhists generally referred to prajna with a compound of two characters, je and hui, which in that compound word literally means realizing quick-wittedness or prudence. Realizing quick-wittedness or prudence. In other words, it's kind of interesting language. Wisdom in this case, then, is not a matter of knowing about the nature of things or realizing the cessation of unwholesome influences or gaining some special kind of state of consciousness. What the Chinese understood as prajna, wisdom, is responsive virtuosity. Wisdom is an embodied function of responding appropriately in the world, not as some idea or understanding of something. It's what you've heard me sometimes called improvisational virtuosity. We respond to things fresh, in the moment, here, now, like it is, in a way that's unhindered, less caught, more free, so that Tao is moving more freely. So these are, once again, ancient, historical, technical components, but orients us to how central conduct is as an understanding of Buddha, not conduct as in being good. In fact, in the Platform Sutra, when Huining, he substitutes the character for Hui in Ji Hui, that realizing quick-wittedness or prudence, this activity. He substitutes the character for Hui, meaning clever or prudent. I just found this in some of my study. I found it really curious. He substitutes that for another character, which is pronounced exactly the same. It's pronounced Hui. But this one has more of a meaning of conferring kindness or benefit or favor or according with or being gracious. So in a way, what the sixth ancestor is making clear is that for him, the function of meditation and all the practice is the skillful offering of our lives totally in the spirit of understanding kindness. And that's the foundation of conduct, a Buddha's conduct, which the precepts describe. Because they're descriptions of the way a Buddha conducts oneself in the world. Not a set of prescriptions that says you will be good and pure if you follow these things. So you can see that this different way of looking at the precepts we spoke about last night is rooted in this different understanding. So if a bodhisattva builds their practice of ethical conduct on a vision of the world's interconnectedness, they're going to have to see that the world is actually empty of this separation and a kind of cramped limitation. And what it's full of is connection, warmth, and embrace. And the consequence of this profound spiritual turn that I'm talking about is naturally a feeling of kindness and humility. When you see that we're all in this together. And there's a tenderness that comes with this, the ability to have kind of the humble willingness to make effort each day toward right conduct, if you want to call it that, without trying to measure our success, without some concern about I'm doing well or I'm not doing well. Just a generous offering with humility. I've heard one teacher say that enlightenment is to be unconcerned about non-perfection. And in this case, you see the foundations for this. Here's a brief quotation from Norman Fisher. You know, I quote Norman a lot because he's such a good writer. His language is wonderful. Listen to his words. He says, the practice of ethical conduct can be seen as the pinnacle of the spiritual life. Through it, we express and live what we have learned and become. The practice of ethical conduct is both a tool for the development of our own maturity and the very expression of that maturity, which is neither a state of mind nor an accomplishment, but an ongoing path towards understanding that is reflective as well as active. So I'll pause there. So he says ethical conduct, the precepts are the actual pinnacle of spiritual life, because through an understanding of this, we're expressing and living out what we've learned in practice and how we're being shaped, what we're becoming. Since conduct in the world is the activity of a Buddha. And he says the practice of ethical conduct is a tool. Sure, we have these practices to do that assist us in maturing, but as we use them, it's the expression of maturity, of our waking up and our growing up, since maturity seems to be what this is all focused on. Not psychological maturity, the maturity of unfolding of what it means to be a full human being. I think some of you have heard me tell the sort of humorous story of Uchiyama Roshi, who is a very respected 20th century Japanese teacher who taught many Westerners. I was privileged to go with Blanche to that monastery on the west coast of Japan in the mountains. This is where her sewing teacher lived part of the time and was a devotee of Uchiyama. And someone asked Uchiyama one time those questions that you ask teachers that are kind of apparent, but you want to see what they're going to say. And they said, what is a bodhisattva? And in his broken English, Uchiyama said, I think a grown-up. He was talking about a mature human being. So Norman is saying, and this kind of maturity through ethical practice isn't a state of mind like we just mentioned in terms of a state of consciousness, and it's not some accomplishment, but it's an ongoing path It's something that keeps opening in front of us all the while. And like any path, if you walk it long enough, it makes an impression in the earth. And the ones coming behind you see where to walk. So it's a generous offering. And then we can express ourselves with kindness, clarity, wisdom, and beauty, really. So to practice, Norman says, in this sense, the practice of ethical conduct is fundamental to our maturity. All the other practices support, deepen, and strengthen it. So this is our foundation in the precepts. There is a handout that I sent you. Pardon me, just a second. An overview of the precepts, not the one that was just sent out today, that are Norman's. We'll get back to that. But it says, I think, Huber and Rossetto, because it pulls together the teachings of Sherry Huber, a Zen teacher, and Diane Rossetto, another teacher. And it starts out at the top of the page, if you have your copy, with a brief quotation from a book called The Golden Age of Zen. And I'd like for us to just walk through this one. And I hope that you have it. Is it something that I should share on the screen? Would that be easier? If we did that, I'll pull it up for a second. And that way, when I'm referring to it, you can see it most easily. There are forms for Zoom, just like there are forms for the Zendo. There we go. That come up for people okay? Great. I found something really interesting. Tell me if I'm the only one who does this, or if some of you do this too. I prepared this a while back, and then when I offered it to you, I looked back at the quote and I thought, I wonder why I chose that. It was kind of interesting. So I had to look at it like a student who's beginning. Not only the sudden perception of truth, but also an unexpected experience of spontaneous goodness can liberate you from the shell of your little ego and transport you from the stuffy realm of concepts and categories to the beyond. Whenever goodness flows, uncontaminated by the ideas of duty and sanction, there is Zen. And when I read it again, after reflecting on the teachings, I was just saying, it's like, oh, now I remember. Now I see. It's not some perception of prajna, truth, some idea, but an embodied experience of goodness, the kindness that Hui Ning was talking about, that begins to liberate us again and again, because we get caught again and again from the stuffy realm of concepts and categories to something that goes well beyond that. And whenever goodness flows, whenever the Tao is open, when it's unhindered, when this generous care moves, contaminated by the ideas of duty and sanction, of being a really good Zen student, then actually Zen is moving. So it's interesting to decide to use it, then forget why I did, and then have to relearn it because it woke something up in me a little bit. So let's go through these particular ways of looking at the precepts. We're actually going to talk about the precepts now, finally. We're going to get to them. And as I said yesterday, there are 5 basic, almost any spiritual path, almost all the wisdom traditions have them, not just Buddhism. And basically, almost all the wisdom traditions say it's a really good idea not to kill, not to steal, not to lie, not to misuse the powerful energy of sexuality, not to intoxicate yourself or other people. Those are kind of basic. But it goes a little further. And in this case, I think this is not my doing, but I think it's I think Sherry Huber started doing it this way. I think this is a brilliant way of looking at each of them, because let's just look at the first one. Not to lead a harmful life, nor encourage others to do so. And you can see in number B, prohibition, this is the no killing thing. And if you look down through all of them, the prohibition is, see, number 1 is no killing, number 2 is no stealing, number 3, no, this is the old-fashioned prohibitory way of looking at it. But the brilliance of this, I think, is how she opened up, what's the inspiration that goes with the prohibition? What's the aspiration? What is the key and what's the vow? Because this really starts to open it up. And this is another thing about Zen practice that I love. It doesn't try to assist us in narrowing down our ideas to like the truth or a belief. It takes everything and opens it up and turns it over so that it becomes alive, so energy can flow through it. So it's a large container for life energy to flow. There's a small teaching story, which I repeat often because I think it's rather clever, which maybe you've heard, but in the Buddhist, old Buddhist iconography, there's an idea of Mara. Mara is, the figure that in the Buddhist enlightenment story was tempting him, kind of like the devil. And so it's said that Mara and his minions saw a woman walking down the road and she was clearly awakened. Somehow her conduct and the way she was embodied suggested to them that she'd waked up. So the minions told Mara, it's like, uh-oh, we got a problem here. Somebody's waking up. We got to throw him off the path because that's our job, And Mara said, oh, don't worry about it. She'll just turn it into a belief. She'll make it small. She'll narrow it down instead of let it stay open. And it's, a little, there's a little cynicism in it, but you don't have to raise your hand if you understand it, because we all understand it in our own bodies. We want to narrow things down to something we can rely on in a profoundly interdependent and impermanent world where there aren't such things. So when we look at the first precept, not to lead a harmful life, nor encourage others to do so, and the prohibition is not killing, I thought the inspiration was really great. There's no separate self. Why would you have such a thing? There's no separate self. Well, that would suggest that if everything is connected, I can't destroy this finger without hurting my hand. There's no separate finger. There's no separate self. I don't want to kill because it's killing me. And so the aspiration would be to live in harmony with all life and the environment that sustains it. Because I am all life. There's not me and then life out there. And when I realize that I'm lived and being lived by all life, then there's an immense feeling of gratitude. So I take up the way of supporting life, not killing. So do you get a little feel for how these, it's a beautiful way of meeting each one. So let's just walk through them. It's good to get a feel for the precepts. And remember, I'm going to say it over and over and over. These are not commandments that say, if you do these things, you are a good Buddha. These are descriptions of what maturity looks like in the life of a bodhisattva. If you understand that there's no separate self, and you begin to feel the deep gratitude of living as part of the harmony of all life, then you're not going to kill. Not killing or not damaging, not harming is a natural expression of wakefulness. It's not something you do so you can awaken. If you do a bunch of moral things to try to become good or better, you're forsaking your natural state, not according with it. So let's look at number 2. The prohibition is not stealing. That's the foundational one. The inspiration says there's no scarcity of resources. So this is the vow to not take what isn't given. to freely give, to ask for and accept what is needed, let resources flow. And in doing so, one is going to feel a natural sense of generosity. If there's no scarcity, then you'd naturally feel generosity. So not to take what isn't given. And once again, these become kind of like koans, as you know, those teaching stories or phrases that are deeper than they appear to be. When you say not to take what isn't given, sometimes that's not always clear. But the vow is to take up the way of taking only what is freely given, or it's not snatching something away, and giving freely all that I can, because it includes generosity. So once again, from an energetic point of view, it's the free flow of the Tao, but it also has to do with basically our love and care for each other. It's not just about objects. There's no scarcity of resources. Number 3 is the foundational precept about not misusing sexuality. The sort of headline on this one is not to commit or participate in unchaste conduct. And I love the inspiration because it says there's no scarcity of love. It doesn't say there's no scarcity of sex. That's another discussion. It says there's no scarcity of love. But because we get these things conflated and confused, then this starts bleeding over into precept number 2. Because guess what? I'm going to say it bluntly. Guess what rape is? That's taking something that's not freely given. So now you're violating number 2. And also number 1, because you're harming. This is just an example. So sexual misconduct, now you see, oh, they all weave together here. Now the aspiration is to give and accept affection and friendship without clinging. That clinging is the key to all of these. The key is love, of course. So one vows to take up the way of engaging in sexual intimacy respectfully and with an open heart. It's interesting that the vow says, I take up the way of engaging in sexual intimacy. That's the vow, to take up the way of engaging in sexual intimacy. As if sexual intimacy is part of your vow, not don't be sexual. Well, what does that actually mean? Does it necessarily mean genital conduct? What does it mean? So once again, you begin to see how they flow with and through each other. Number 4 is about not lying. You see the prohibition, not lying or deceiving others. The vow would be to, or the aspiration here, excuse me, is to not to tell lies nor practice believing the fantasies of authority. That's a great one, isn't it? I've never heard it stated that way. Not to tell lies nor practice believing the fantasies of authority. What if that was part of the oath of office for our public officials? Not to tell lies or practice believing the fantasies of authority? Oh my goodness. And that there's no need to hide the truth. Because if your aspiration is to see and act in accord with what is, each moment, life as it is, the only teacher, continue to turn toward life as it is, then you're going to see more truth. Not truth as in some idea of truth or some verbal expression of truth, but the truth of the matter. The vow is to take up the way of speaking truthfully. That's true. But honesty comes from a deep place. And if you have a transparency that allows you not to be Not just frightened of the truth, because of course we get afraid sometimes, but to meet the truth on truth's terms. And the more important and more intimate the situation, the more crucial it is that we not forget this. So we don't tell lies, and we don't engage in the practice of believing the lies that we're told, just because of imbalances in power. And that goes from our closest relationships to our communities in terms of social justice. You can also see how now number 4 can influence number 3 in terms of seduction. And of course, to make it more complicated, go into a bar. Number 5. Not to misuse intoxicating drinks or narcotics, nor assist others to do so. This is about not clouding the mind. If your aspiration is to be clear and awake, then not clouding the mind would be an important direction to go in. I've added there's no need to hide from the truth in this as well. Similar to what we saw in terms of up here, in terms of telling the truth and not lying. To embrace all experience directly. You can see in some ways it's a variant, isn't it? Because the key is awareness, to stay awake, to take up the way of cultivating a clear mind. In the Zen tradition, it doesn't say don't drink. It says be aware. Just like it says you needn't be celibate. Just be aware that these are powerful energies and they're to be attended to carefully. Kind of like, remember the sword I was talking about yesterday? Sometimes you have to find your way, or like I was talking with Jenna about meat eating, things like that. You have to find your way. Once we've gone past those foundational 5, there are more, and depending on the list that you look at, there are quite a number. There are 10 or there are 16 precepts. But here are a few more that go with what we find in Diane Rossetto's book, which is the guide that I'm going to suggest that you refer to in your study and training. And number 6 is not to publish other people's faults. So the prohibition is not blaming or criticizing, not speaking badly of people. If the inspiration is to understand that there are no victims or perpetrators, that's a dicey one when it comes to certain experiences that we have. And the aspiration to acknowledge responsibility for everything in your life. I don't think that this is saying that there aren't ways in which people get victimized. There are. I think it's speaking more about a psychological perspective that you can get caught in, where you begin categorizing yourself and others in these ways on basically like the drama triangle. And it's easy to speak of other people's faults. If you want to practice one precept daily and see what it's like, here's one you can try. When you're talking to someone, see what it's like never to talk about anyone else. I don't mean data, like I need to talk to Ryan about something. I don't mean that. But evaluating them, you'll find out you don't have as much to talk about. I'm sorry to say. And I'm not suggesting you need to do this. It's just an interesting thing to realize how this one is very subtle, because we're evaluating all the time. And there's, in that evaluation, there's an up and a down. There's a power differential. There's closer and further. And of course, those things are useful in some practical ways, but as a way of life, as a way of practice, it actually impedes our capacity for kindness, for meeting each other in the vulnerability and sensitivity that's required. And there are ways in which the precepts that's come before help us turn away from our vulnerability, because it's difficult sometimes. Number 7 is very close, not to extol oneself and slander others. The prohibition is not to covet, basically, not competing or coveting. And it goes further beyond the victims and perpetrators. There's no winners and losers. So that you give your best effort. And guess what? You got to accept the results in your life, which calls forward a deep humility. And the way I like it best is, and number 7 is the vow, I take up the way of meeting others on equal ground. That's fantastic, isn't it? The way it's said, I take up the way of meeting others on equal ground. And if you take up the way of speaking of others with openness and possibility, you also have a greater chance of taking up the way of meeting others on equal ground. If, in number 5, you take up the way of cultivating a clear mind, you're more likely to speak with openness and possibility and meet people on equal ground. And then in number 8, it goes along with I take up the way of letting go of anger. Not to rage, resent, or seek revenge. To see everything as an opportunity and profound acceptance. It doesn't say anger is a bad thing. It's basically not harboring anger and learning to let go of anger, letting the powerful energies of anger move through you. But once again, if we were to just circle back, if this was a circle, a big INSO, and we went back to number 1, how often are our thoughts and our attitudes towards other people essentially harming because of the way that we hang on to anger? And how often do those things come from feeling like there's a scarcity of resources, number 2? They have something I don't, including love. So we feel less generous, our heart begins to close, we feel less gratitude. Of course there's less love in that situation. There's a sense of not being quite so honest, because you're going to lose something. Our awareness begins to be inhibited, our kindness less free. There's more arrogance and entitlement, less humility, and far less acceptance. So these are classic things, but I hope that this gives you a feel for the way that the precepts can be spoken about, not just as don'ts, not just as a set of ethical conducts, and the resources that these are drawn from. Waking Up to What You Do, a Zen practice for meeting every situation, is the book that I would suggest that everyone have. And the 8 vows that are at the bottom of each of these in the list are essentially the chapters in this book on the precepts. The way that the inspiration, prohibition, aspiration, the key, and vow were opened up is from Sherry Huber's book, Good Life. And if you want to understand more of the deeper and classical understanding of the precepts in the Zen tradition, then Reb Anderson's book, Being Upright, is a wonderful source. So those are on your handout, so you'll have them. They're easy for you to find. So that's quite a bit, I know. But I wanted you to get an orientation, what the precepts are in the beginning, how they relate with conduct and vows, and then to begin to look at them. There is a resource on the Appamada website, which is Precept Study at Appamada, and there's a tremendous resource there that you can call on. And you all have these resources, and you can follow them together in your study and practice past this retreat. And they are guides to assist you in this return home. And since I've given you quite a bit, both as an orientation and then we've kind of taken a look at the basics in the precepts, why don't we open it up for some discussion and some questions, so we can plunge in together today. So remember how to raise your hand, and then Bill will see you.
Hi.
Leslie, hi.
Um, so one of the precepts, number 6, not to publish others' faults, that one really hit hard, especially when you said, when you're talking to one person, see what it's like to not talk about anyone else. So, that just really hit hard for me because I don't practice that. So I guess my question is this, Flint, so I grew up kind of in a Christian background, and we have the concept of asking for forgiveness in the Bodhisattva way. Is, I guess the bottom line question is, if, like for this one in particular, if we find ourselves having done that, is there some repair we need to go do, or do we just stop doing that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think the best idea in the beginning is just stop doing it and see what happens. Because this is basically the precept called don't gossip. Don't gossip.
Oh, don't gossip. Oh, okay, got it.
That's the bottom line for a lot of people, you know. And I think that, you know how forgiveness and seeking forgiveness can get complicated really fast.
Mhm.
But beginning to refrain from behaviors that you might think might be harmful um, is a good beginning because it's self-responsible. It doesn't ask the person to do anything. It doesn't ask them to have to even help you in any way. Once you begin to shift your behavior, notice what it's like. If I go out in the yard and I've turned on the water in the hose and I crimp the hose for a minute because I don't, the pressure backs up. So once you stop the outflow of some habit you've been doing, what starts to back up? What do you start noticing? That's something that you can begin to focus on and take care of. And maybe that's some psychological work. Maybe that's some repair inside. I don't know.
Mhm.
And then if it appears that there's something that needs to be done, then you'll have a better sense of whether or not to do it. In other words, the initiating behavior isn't the asking for forgiveness. It's the cessation of the behaviors, and see what's left after you sit with it a while.
Thanks.
And that's the it's like instead of just rushing out for forgiveness, using our Christian metaphors that we grew up with, go walk in the desert a little bit, or go pray in the garden a little bit, see what you find, then take another step out. Is this touching on what you're asking?
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, because I have to. Oh, when you said that, it's like, oh my gosh, do I need to go out and do a bunch of repair making first? But I like the concept of just sitting back, uncrimping the hose and see what comes up first.
If you think about this, some of you are familiar with 12-step work, for example, and making amends is way down the list.
Mm,
In the beginning, you've got to do step 4 and 5. You've got to really look at yourself deeply and really offer yourself in a place that's safe. You've got to do a lot of work before you decide to do amends. Otherwise, you're really not you're not clear. And so it's kind of mapped onto, that's another analogy for this.
yeah, thank you.
Mhm.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
I'm not sure who is speaking. I think that she raised your hand. I didn't know if she.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I think Julia might have been next. Just click the little icon down on the funny face down there, and that'll put you in line.
Oh, click on what? I'm sorry.
Yeah. Did you see that little face down there with a plus on at the bottom?
It says participants and chat and funny face. I don't see a funny face.
Smiley face.
Smiley face, yeah. Sorry, I don't see one.
Click on that, and then it'll say raise hand
Hmm.
underneath it.
Oh, reactions. Here we go. Raise hand. Here we go. Okay.
You did it.
All right. Thank you.
So, Julia here, along the lines of the last inquiry, a dear friend of mine was deep into a Zen practice a couple of years ago, and she was doing a month of no gossip. And I was at a gathering with her, and she has a daughter my son's age who was in France, and I said, how's your daughter doing? And I remember feeling very kind of taken aback, a little insulted. I had a mixture of emotions when she said to me, well, you'll have to ask her. And I was, I was like, okay. And then I went home and kind of was like really struggling with this and kind of fuming, like, well, how can I ask her? She's in France. And, and it's just such a simple question. Like, why couldn't she just say, give me a little, it's kind of, to me, that was more like normal, how's your family? How are things going? And so could you just speak to that and help me understand it a little more?
Well, maybe we can do this together.
Okay.
Just think about it for a second.
Okay.
You're assuming, and I'm assuming, that she was attempting to practice the no gossip kind of precept.
Yes.
Okay. And so technically, she was following that precept kind of to the letter.
Mhm.
What other precepts was she breaking? Might have been. I mean,
Yeah.
now we're talking about her, but we're
Well,
just using this as an example.
mhm. Well, so what else was she? Well, I felt that it wasn't I didn't feel it was kindly. I mean, now I'm judging, right? Yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I felt a little shamed. I mean, frankly, but I don't know what she was breaking. I mean, I didn't feel it was kind, but again,
And we're just using this as an example. This really isn't an evaluation of her.
Yeah. I know.
A teaching point, which is, well, I'm gonna go way out on a limb here. I'm gonna be more extreme for a second.
Okay.
Anytime we do something so absolutely and rigidly, we're essentially becoming a fundamentalist.
Yeah.
And that's a strong thing. What I'm trying to say really is that you have to understand the impact that your intention is making, even if your intention is well-meaning in your own practice.
Mhm.
So it might be important for you to refrain from speaking about others, not gossiping. Well, does that say I can't be kind to my friend and saying something generous and loving about my daughter?
Mhm.
Is that gossip?
Mhm.
Or I might say, this is going to sound really weird. I'm not going to say much about my daughter because it's responsive to you.
Mhm.
It isn't just a closed door. Remember the feeling in Chan is how do we keep the Tao flowing? How do we keep life force alive in this? Because when I talked about improvisational virtuosity, that's a fancy sounding word, but I kind of like it because what it says is, I can't land on one principle and hold to it.
Mhm.
I have to keep that principle as the center point that organizes my behavior, but I have to be flexible enough around it to meet what comes at me.
Mhm.
So what's the appropriate response? Not what's the right response, what's the appropriate response?
Mhm.
Is this making sense?
Yes. No, it's very helpful.
And it doesn't just mean do whatever you want relatively to have feels. Once again, the precepts are more challenging because you have to stay awake and really realize all the consequences. And when Zen Master Dogen, in whose lineage I'm ordained, brought Zen from China to Japan, when he was asked, what does it mean to be a priest? He said, one continuous mistake. Mistake after mistake after mistake. It wasn't self-deprecating, oh, I'm a terrible sinner. That's not what he was saying. He was saying, this isn't perfectible, but it is realizable, and we just continue to wake up because it's an ongoing flow of maturation all the time.
Thank you. Very helpful.
Welcome. There you go.
Okay, thank you.
You're back.
Yeah, back and just enjoying this so much. When as we were going along and into the number 8 of the precepts, I thought, how do we possibly keep ourselves away from accomplishment when we're working? Well, even that when we're working on these, I mean, when we're living through them.
How do you not accomplish accomplishment, non-accomplishment?
Yeah, right.
You don't. That's what Dogen meant when he said one continuous mistake. It's not being caught by all our ideas about accomplishment. They'll be there.
Mhm.
This is what we wake up to realize I have a habit. I certainly avow that I have a habit of accomplishment. And there's nothing wrong with it. You can accomplish great things. But there are certain things in which goal setting, kind of self-improvement, isn't really what's on the table here.
Mhm.
And this sort of waking up business isn't about, essentially, it's not self-improvement. It's not something you were going to do to get better at.
Okay.
But we all come to practice with our curative fantasies. If I do this, it's going to make me a better person. If I do this, it's going to make me whatever ideas we have about ourselves that are not so great. And all of that will continue until it doesn't so much, and we get less caught by it.
Okay.
And so we have to, well, we don't have to. What's happening usually on the side is we're developing patience with ourselves, and we're developing the capacity for forgiveness. If you look at the list, for example, and all you look is at the highlighted words, which are the keys, for a second,
Okay.
and you were starting at number 8, right? That's the one that brought it up. So let's look at those for just a second. If I practice imperfectly, but the best I can to accept myself, that's the highlighted one, number 8, isn't it? I realize that that's very difficult. So number 7, I'm met with an immense humility as I attempt over and over to accept myself, which is a deep function of kindness. And number 6, attending to this opens my awareness, number 5, and my honesty, number 4, with myself. And when that's possible, I can actually love myself, number 3, and others, because I'm so much more generous. And then number 1, I feel grateful for my life.
Thank you.
Sure. And for the lives of those around me too, by the way.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Suzanne, you made it in.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so kind of going along with what's been discussed.
Huh?
Yeah, just kind of so you're saying that there even though there's a big uh enlightenment that we can all go have as a goal in our life, we just naturally go toward people who are enlightened and or aware or educated or whatever you may be. But then if you get to a place where you're seeking out like knowledge and awareness, and I'm just wondering, what do you do when you get to a point where, okay, now I've been enlightened enough, and or you find somebody and it turns out that you didn't want to be made aware of that person's enlightenment. I'm just kind of figuring out, what kind of path do you take when all of a sudden you're not on that path to be like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or some kind of a I don't know, I guess some kind of hierarchy, yeah, enlightenment, whatever. I'm not choosing the right words, I know. But is
What is it that, yeah, you're struggling with some things
mm-hmm.
that get kind of knotted up and complicated. I understand. It's exactly what we're talking about. But there are some fundamental assumptions under what you're saying is that there's a goal that you're striving for and that you might actually reach it at some point. It's reachable, and that some other people might be doing that same thing, but it's inherently, essentially competitive. Some people would have it, some people, all of those things are actually not part of this practice. But what is it in your heart, right? What is it that you really want to know? What's the knot that you really want to untangle? What is the thing that's like, this is what really gets to me?
Yeah, I mean, I think have a sense of peace, or have a sense of being beloved in the world on some level.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
plenty right there.
Okay, that's a big accomplishment, right?
Well, and it's not accomplishable, Suzanne.
Okay, yeah.
You can't accomplish it. What I'm saying is your essential nature, like everyone else's, is that of a Buddha. That doesn't mean heightened or extolled or perfected.
Okay.
It means you are you. You're what animates and enlivens your life, the life force that's in you, is the same life force that moves through me. I'm not you, you're not me, our forms are different, but what infuses us with vitality and awareness and wakefulness, that's all the same, actually. And when we begin to realize that sameness, that interconnectedness, that mutual dependence on each other, then everybody is cherishable. Even the ones that look like they're acting really badly, because what you're seeing is their suffering, that they've lost their way somehow, and they're frightened. And they believe things like, everybody is actually separate. Resources are really scarce. That there's not enough love in the world, that you have to hide from the truth. If you don't, that people are going to criticize you. And there are people who are more powerful. There are winners and losers. I'm going to make mistakes. When you believe all that stuff, that's all about separation. We come together and have some capacity for kindness with each other, then we start beloving each other. There's a great quote I read one time from the wonderful Christian mystic Thomas Merton, and it's a famous quotation where he had a moment of a real insight and awakening. And he was describing the experience. It was ineffable. He was doing his best to describe it. But at the end of the quote, he said, I suppose if we saw each other this way all the time, the way God sees us, we would just fall down and worship each other.
Yeah, that's a tall order.
There's a tall order. But here's the smaller order.
Okay.
Is that Houston Smith, who just died a few years ago, was probably the greatest scholar of comparative religion that we know of. He wrote the textbooks on comparative religion, and he practiced them and he studied them. He's a great guy. And late in his life, in an interview when he's quite old, in his 90s, someone was doing an interview with him and said, "You've studied this stuff, you've practiced it, you're a great scholar. Is there some like prayer or some practice that you do that you come back to as your central one?" He said, "Yeah, there is." And they said, "Would you mind sharing?" And he said, "No." He said, "There's a piece of paper on my bedside that's always there that was written down by a 9-year-old boy. And he had given it to me as a practice. And all it says is, 'Dear God, I'm doing the best I can.'"
Okay.
So start there.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's so humbling. Thank you. Yeah.
Good. And do you feel a little more sense of ease?
Yeah. Yeah, I do.
Good, because that's what you were wanting. Great.
Mhm. Thank you.
Mhm. Hey, Maru.
Hi, again, it's me. I'm kind of confused with all this because I can get the feeling that all these precepts are like to improve myself,
Mhm.
but they are meant to the others. So I don't know which is the line, like, do I have to do it for myself and then I'll become good for the others, or I try to do it for the other ones and then it'll come backwards. I don't know. I'm just getting untangled in all this.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons I have spent so much time um, attempting to communicate as best I can in so many ways. This isn't about self-improvement because it's natural, isn't it?
Mhm.
It's so easy to see them as rules. And that's why I say these aren't rules to follow to be good. They're descriptions of what a mature person acts like. And then you can use them to help you if your aspiration, if your vow, if your desire is to be of benefit in the world. These are some guidelines that will be like your North Star that will help guide you. But they don't start with, "There's something wrong with you, and now I'm going to give you some precepts, and they're going to fix you." It's more like, "You're perfect just like you are. And because you're a conditioned human being like the rest of us, we have troubles. And these are the ways to help us steer back onto the road, so we don't go into the ditch." There's nothing on that whole list, I would imagine, that you have some disagreement with. You'd like to be accepting. You'd like to be kind. You'd like to be aware. Humility comes along, all those things. So all of that is already in you.
Mhm.
But then we have to start taking a look at, if we want to, that's our vow to stay awake, how is it that we have, maybe we're missing the mark a little bit, and to keep us awake. And when we're with other people who care about the same thing, like when you and I are talking about it,
Mhm.
I'm not here to judge you or you're here to judge me. We're here to say, wow, it's a tall order, isn't it?
Mhm.
And let's just do the best we can to help each other because we care about each other, not because we want to be a good person instead of a bad person. It's because we care about each other. And that's why those teachings from China about kindness being important, not some sort of wisdom, not some idea. It's just about caring for each other more deeply and giving each other a lot of space, a lot of acceptance, a lot of permission to be ourselves, but with the reminder of when Suzuki Roshi was teaching one time, he said to his students, "You are perfect just like you are, and you could use a little improvement." And so he was talking about these two sides, that of course we land on. But there was another time at a long retreat and you've been in a retreat that's been several days long, so you know how in the middle it gets a little challenging, And in that middle, he came in one day to give a talk like I'm doing today. And in his very slow, broken English, he said to the people who he could see were struggling, he said, all of the difficulties that you have in your life right now. And he paused, and the person I've heard tell this story said he thought he was going to say, will be fixed by your practice, All of the troubles that you have in your life right now will continue for the rest of your life. And then he laughed, not because he was being pessimistic or even sadistic. He was saying, this is a life of trouble and difficulty and challenge. That won't stop. But the way you meet it makes a very big difference. And you can make things worse, or you can help things not be worse. And these are some guidelines. If you lie, steal, hurt, and it's going to make things worse in a world that is full of troubles. Or you can maybe try to help out a little bit, But it's so hard to stay away from the idea of rules, commandments, right and wrong. It is. So we help each other, and all of us have to ask the question again and again to get reminded,
Yeah, I know.
And as many times as you need, please do, because this is essential. I appreciate it.
And then I think that this work I've been doing by sitting and going inside of me somehow makes me more selfish. But then I try to be like more compassion to the other people, but I still thinking in this very narrow way.
Yeah.
I don't feel this, for example, there are some, I don't know, some things that they say they feel like connected.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone or in every whatever. And I just cannot get to that. And I keep thinking to me, so this is like really a list of duties I have to do.
And you just
it gets all the way on to me, myself and my only and me, myself, and with me.
Yeah. As long as you're focused on the I, then you'll be lost. And also, you just gave me a clue, is that you think that meditation is about going inside. And a lot of people think that about mindfulness, as if it's somehow going in.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the reasons that we sit with the kind of posture, we sit upright and open and we keep our eyes open gently, is because we're sitting in the midst of our lives to experience it, not to go away. It's not about going in. It's about just stopping and turning toward life to realize the interconnectedness of everything. And it's not about waiting, because there's nothing to wait for. If you're already and always a Buddha, it's realizing, then you express who you are. So it's not going inside. It's not waiting. And those of us who learned some of these things in church about prayer, it's like a collapse. We kind of like collapse. But no, this is about sitting up, letting our heart come forward, not letting our heart go backward. Letting our heart come forward to life. So you're asking such important questions, because they're the kind of habits that most of us have. If you want to not feel that pressure of me, I, then find ways to practice where you're serving other people instead of thinking about yourself. There's, do you have Joko Beck's first book, Everyday Zen?
No, I don't.
It's in Spanish.
Yeah, I know.
And the last chapter,
Or yeah, maybe.
the last chapter is called The Parable of Mushin, and it's about this guy who wanted to get enlightened, and he was going to do it no matter what, and he worked hard and all, and finally just kind of gave up, and he couldn't do it anymore. So he started a daycare center and did all this stuff, and of course he woke up doing that.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. Thanks to you.
Marla,
Hi,
so good to see you.
thank you. It's good to see you. I'm going to rewind a little bit to before we were talking about the precepts.
Yes.
I have read a number of people's answers to this question, and I'm very eager to hear your answer to it.
Uh-oh.
What is the difference between a Buddha and a Bodhisattva, and does it matter?
Okay, good question. Because when I used them interchangeably earlier, I thought somebody's going to ask me this question. The characters for Buddha just mean an awakened being. That's all. Then there's, of course, the historical, thing we talk about as the Buddha, but there's really not. You'll see tomorrow I'm going to talk about a whole bunch of Buddhas. And so it's just an awakened being, that's all. And it doesn't apply to a one person or an exalted state, and it can also be thought of as the awakened nature that's in all of us anyway, our Buddha nature. A bodhisattva is more of an ideal set in Mahayana Buddhism, and I'm going to rewind even further. In northern India, in the Theravadan tradition, or the tradition of the elders that came straight out of Hinduism, the ideal was an Atman. I'm sorry, not an Atman. That came from Hinduism. I'm at an age where the name just went out of my head. Anyway, there was another ideal, not a bodhisattva. Arhat. Sorry, Arhat. Right, it's close. Thank you. And an Arhat was an individual who would practice very diligently and strive to go through all the jhanas, these states to arrive at enlightenment and then escape the cycle of birth and death. So it did have a trajectory, an endpoint. That's the Arhat ideal. The Mahayana ideal wasn't the Arhat, it was the Bodhisattva, who practices for the benefit of everyone else and vows to stay around until everyone else is enlightened before they step off. So it's a different model. Both of these teachings were in the teachings from the beginning, but they're emphasized differently. So a bodhisattva is essentially a narcissistic, mature human being who realizes that they only exist because of the benefit of everybody else, and so they're going to be generous and help them. In a Buddhist practice, it means we realize we sit for the benefit of others, not to improve ourselves. And of course, in the process, we get the thing. It's like the Dalai Lama talks about the kind of foolish way to practice and the really good way to practice. The foolish way to practice is to practice for yourself, because you only got one person to help, and you only got one chance, and it's kind of small, and you get all wrapped up. He said the smart way is to practice for everybody else, because they will benefit in the process. You'll lose your self-centeredness, and you'll benefit. So does that help with the?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Good. And that's why Uchiyama's definition of a bodhisattva, meaning a grown-up, means somebody that's not self-centered. Because like a young, even emotionally immature person is about, what can I get? And as you get to be our age, it's like, what can I offer? It's a turn.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. It's lovely to see you. Oop, got remuted. There you go.
Hi, Flint.
It's so good to see you.
It's nice to see you. It's great. So, I feel kind of messed up right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you asked like what, is going on kind of in your heart. And I'm messed up about honesty.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel I'm very emotional about it.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's so tricky because I am sometimes spoken about as, oh, you're too direct. You're too direct. It's very commonly said to me. You're warm, but you are too direct. And for me, honesty isn't about me, actually. It's really about I may observe something or think something, and it feels like it could be beneficial to share it.
Mm-hmm.
But then when I share it or don't share it, it's because I get the sense people don't want it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm dealing with a very old friend, very, very old friend since I'm very young. And I think he's got some early Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw him this past weekend, and he got very drunk. We were at a wedding, and he was drunk in a way that never has been. And he's an old boyfriend of mine. And I know him since I'm 14, and we're really good friends. And in the middle of talking to me, he just said, with his wife next to him, "You want to make out?" And I went, "Oh, David, that's ridiculous." I said, "That's ridiculous." But and my friend said to me today, I told her the story. She said, "Don't you think you should tell him?" And I'm like freaked out by it. I said, "I want to tell his wife because I'm so worried something's so wrong." And she said to me, "I think you should tell him so that he knows what's going on." And I'm sitting there with that concept of, this is like, it's about my worry about what you don't see in your life. It's not because I have this desire to tell, but I feel like this is not going to be received well, what I mean, because so it's an example for me of sometimes knowing something and feeling like I want to share it for the benefit of others, but not knowing if that is wanted. And
this is
it's so painful. It feels so
crux of the matter,
painful.
isn't it? It is, because what you're saying, I'm making it a little
Yeah.
precise, is you can feel the deep power of your intention.
Mhm.
And you are also, because of your pretty bright, sophisticated person, you also are appreciative of the potential impact.
Right.
And those are not the
Right.
same. Some
Right.
people who don't pay attention to impact, they're like, well, my intention was good. It's like, well, who cares?
Right.
You
Right.
don't
Right.
have anything
Right.
to
Right.
say. Or you get so wrapped up in impact that you're frozen and never come forward.
Right.
And so
Right. And then where's generosity and love, and where's all that?
this is why we practice, isn't it? Because there's not a right answer. I can tell you that, and you've been around me enough to know that I have a commitment to be kind, but we also know that sometimes withholding isn't kind because bad things can happen. I have a commitment to help people wake up. It's also not my responsibility to make them see every single thing. In fact, sometimes
Right.
that's a little brutal. So I live with a lot of love and care for people, and I live with a broken heart. And that's just the way it is. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
It's a powerful thing. It's a tenderizing thing.
I think that's what I'm really feeling. I'm feeling like there's a lot around where
Yeah.
speaking the truth may not be the right way to go. Or speak,
Yeah.
it
And your truth may not be somebody else's truth either.
right,
And you
right.
know this. I'm not telling you anything different. So that's why all of the precepts are so important. Will I kill a certain spirit or connection? I won't kill somebody, but will I kill a relationship by saying this? Am I taking something from them, an idea they have that isn't, am I stealing something by doing this? I mean, it's very nuanced, you know?
Yeah, is the arrow too sharp? It's like when people say to me, sometimes you're too direct, I
Mhm.
go like, really? And then I have to look at it because I suspect sometimes that's really true.
Might
That
be.
it's
And
and maybe it might not.
sometimes it's not. Sometimes people are saying, You're really kind, just don't tell me so much because it upsets me." Um, and other times they may feel an edge. It isn't what we say, it's who's saying it. And so there are times, when I used to work in medical environments quite a bit, I wrote some things for doctors called The Art of Delivering Bad News about how to say things that it's unwanted that you have to communicate in ways that it can be received a little better. Now that's more management, and coping kind of stuff and good communication style. But the ultimate of that isn't, am I speaking badly or speaking not so badly? It's like, who's speaking it? If I come from my own true nature, I can probably say things that are tough in a way that'll go in a little easier than if it's a part of me, some conditioned part, because there's an agenda then or a protection, and the precepts talk about that.
Right.
Mhm.
So really it's just I gotta keep working.
This is
Just-
the improvisational virtuosity thing,
I just gotta keep
No,
working.
you do your best, and then you get more data, and then you correct from that. It's everything's moving all the time. There's not like a right prescription. If people are going to be intimate with you and be your friend, they know they're going to meet someone who's direct.
Yeah.
That's not going to change, and there's nothing wrong with you. That's part of who you are. You're a very kind, very caring woman. And you're asking these questions because you're sensitive, because you don't want to hurt people.
Right. I don't want to hurt people. I don't want to,
And you're going to be direct. That's who you are, Ruth. That's okay.
and I don't want to be neglectful either. It's
Of
like
course not.
with this situation, I'm going like, oh my God, this happened. And it's like, I feel like, what do I do? So
And you're always going to be riding that line because that's
thank you.
that's
Yeah.
what you're left with. And I see that we're kind of at the end of our time, right? And and I hope that I'm not trying to rush away. This thing about living with a broken heart, that's at the center.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
what I can feel, and that's what we're sharing.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. I've got a broken heart.
Yeah. One of the things that the organizers asked me to do was to think about some reflections, or even questions to take into the time of reflection now that follows. But you're already beginning to do it because one of the things I wrote for myself was, which of the precepts has captured your attention and has a hold on you? Or to share how you have begun, how that precept has begun to work on you. And what does it mean to engage in wholesome conduct that's not moralistic or described by language that's right and wrong? And we've already begun to touch on these things. I don't know better questions really. Just bring your heart to each other around these things, and listen deeply, and just let people be heard. Speak what you need to speak, so that we can find our way together. Remember, this is about finding our way home in a world it's not going to stop so we get the right answer. It's going to keep spinning and throwing us off. So I think, Ryan, are you going to organize folks? Or someone might?
Yeah. I'm going to turn it over to June, who's actually going to facilitate our Dharma reflection period this evening.
Great.
So,
Hi, June.
and she's right here.
Oh, it's good to see your face.
It's good to see yours.
I'm so glad to see all these people that I've seen before, Well, I hope this has been helpful today. Enjoy your time together.
Yes. Been lovely. Thank you.
Mhm.
Very rich.